Welcome back to everyone who has been joining in for Shulie's series with us at Torah in Motion. For joining in for this one, previous ones. Also, welcome back to people who were just here for the lecture we had this morning with Dr. Simkovich. And welcome also if this is your first time. And of course, I said where you can get caught up and find all of Shulie's other series with us as well. So I'll pass it over to you now.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Maxine. And please put the sources in the chat for people who don't have it. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So today we are going to do our second class on Sefer Shoftim, on the Book of Judges. Last time we kind of took a larger view of the whole book, and we also focused in on the stories that took place in the Jezreel Valley. What I want to do today is zero in on a specific story, on the most disturbing story in the whole book, and that's the last story, the story of Pilages Bagiva, the concubine in Giva, and ultimately the civil war of all the tribes against Benjamin. We're going to talk about that story, and then we're going to use it as a jumping off point to explore Shiloh, right? The ancient site of Shiloh, Tel Shiloh, which was the site of the Mishkan, of the Tabernacle, according to the Gemara, for 369 years. Numbers don't always match up with our own chronology of Tanakh, but in any case, it is clearly a central location for the Mishkan, longer than it ever is anywhere else. And it figures prominently in all the books, right? In the book of Joshua, where we have the giving out of the portions of the tribal portions in Shiloh, in the book of Judges, as we're going to see in our story, and in the very beginning of our next book, of the book of Samuel, of Sefer Shmuel. So we're going to use that this story to get us to Shiloh and to talk about Shiloh. But the story is also significant because if we mentioned last time that the recurring theme over and over again of Sefer Shoftim is Ish hayashar b'einav ya'aseh bayamim hahem en melech b'Yisrael, right? In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was good in his own eyes, i.e., a state of anarchy. And the story of Pilages Bagiva is the ultimate story of that. And the stories build up towards that, right? We have plenty of hints of anarchy with the story of Yiftach and Avimelech, the story of the tribe of Dan going and kind of making their own decisions about where their temple is going to be and who their priests are going to be and where their tribal portion is going to be. But this is really the ultimate story of that. And in that sense, whether or not chronologically it takes place at the end of the period of the Judges, and there are opinions in both directions. Some people see it as a very early story, some people see it as a very late story, but in a literary sense, it clearly has to come at the end of the book, because it's leading to this point where we say, enough, this is a terrible situation. What's the next step? It's what we're going to hear about in the book of Samuel. Give us a king. Nasima aleinu melech. Give us a king, where the people come to the prophet Samuel, who is a good judge, but they say this situation can't go on any longer. And we're going to see that the story that we're going to take apart here of Pilages Bagiva has fascinating parallels to the story of the first king of Israel, of Shaul. And that's not by accident, right? It's set up in a way that makes you say, oh, this is what happens when you don't have a king. This is what happens when you do have a king. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. I suppose this is one of those things that we should have, what are they called, a trigger warning, because it really is a very bad story. But I assume anybody who is here and listening probably has heard at least parts of the story. Small children, you can cover your ears. Okay, so our basic outline of the story, this is the last 3 chapters of the book of Judges. It starts out with kind of, it seems like a very minor story. There's a Levite, an Ish Levi, who is coming from the mountains of Ephraim. We're going to look at the map in a minute. He has a concubine, a Pilages. She is not happy with her treatment with him. She goes back to her father's house in Bethlehem. Okay, so just let's keep in mind, we started in Ephraim, we go to Bethlehem, which is in Judah. He goes after her. There's a whole almost comical story with the father-in-law who wants him to stay and to stay and to stay, but finally they extricate themselves and they start to travel back north towards Ephraim. On the way, starting to get dark, they get a late start, and the servant says, well, let's stay in, let's go over to the town of Yavuz. They said they are nochach Yavuz, they are opposite the town of Yavuz. Yavuz, of course, is Jerusalem, but at that time it's still a Canaanite city. And the Levite says, no, I don't want to go to that non-Jewish city. I don't want to go to a place that's not Israelite. Let's push on a little further and get to the town of Giv'ah. And that's a town in the tribe of Benjamin, our third tribe so far, right? Ephraim, Judah, Benjamin. And there we'll be safe. And of course, the irony is that that is where they are very not safe. They go into Giv'ah. Things don't look good. Nobody's inviting them home. And then old man comes out, invites them home, just says, don't sleep in the street. Okay. In the night, the people of the town come pounding on the door, asking for the old man to give up the Levite and have him be given over to them for sodomy, right? For homosexual rape. If this story is ringing a few familiar bells, realize it is taking off on the story of Sodom that we have in Bereshit. Comparing the people of Benjamin, comparing a tribe in Israel to Sodom, that's pretty bad, right? We're already getting a sense that things are not going to go well in this story. However, unlike in the story of Sodom, where the angels save Lot and save his daughters, doesn't happen here. Okay? The old man won't give up the Levite, but instead they throw the concubine outside, and there's a terrible, terrible assault on her all night. She finally crawls back to the house. The day is dawning. The Levite comes out and says, okay, let's go, right? It is just a clear lack of any kind of humanity in the story. And she falls down dead on the doorstep. He is at this point outraged. Really? Were you not outraged before? Right? Takes her home, cuts up her body into 12 pieces and sends it out to the tribe saying, look what the terrible people of Benjamin have done. We have to take revenge on them. And then they gather together in Mitzpah. Okay, again, an area in Benjamin, interestingly enough, but kind of on the edge, getting closer to Ephraim, but a place where you gather together for war. They gather together, they go out to battle. There is a civil war. We're going to talk about that in a minute, where the tribe of Benjamin is almost completely wiped out. Okay, and then, as if suddenly we're regretful, the people say, oh, wait a second, we don't want to lose the tribe of Benjamin. Let's figure out, we have to marry them off, we have to keep them going, and that's where we're going to get to Shiloh. But we're not there yet. Okay, so let's understand a few things from the story. First of all, where things are happening. Right. So what we have here, this map, this is a nice map of what's called Derech Avot, right? The path of the patriarchs, the path that runs along the watershed line through the mountains. Very, very important road throughout ancient times and still today. Okay, and let's just understand where we're coming from. The Levite is coming from this area, the mountains of Ephraim. He's going down towards Bethlehem, and then they are returning back. They don't go into Yavuz, which is not on the road, right? It's Nochach Yavuz. The road is opposite where Yavuz is, which is interesting because it tells us Jerusalem is not on the main road, one of the many disadvantages of Jerusalem. And they keep on going. They bypass Jerusalem, and they get to this town called Giv'ah. Okay, where is Giv'ah? That is the picture that you see over here on the right. And this is a crazy place. I don't know if anybody here has ever been there. It's really an incredible place to go. Today, it is deep in the heart of the Arab Jerusalem neighborhood of Beit Hanina. And you can see it from all over. It's high on a hill. It's called Tel El Ful, which literally means a hill of beans, right? Don't think of Casablanca, but that's really what it means. Probably somebody planted beans up there at some point. But it seems that this is Giv'ah, or Givat Shaul, right? Because eventually Shaul is going to make his royal residence here on Giv'ah. Why do we think that? Because it fits geographically beautifully with the story. It's going up as you come on Derech HaAvot, as you're heading towards the north. You have an incredible view of everything around there. William Albright excavated here in the 1930s, and he did find remains of an early iron building, meaning it goes back to the time of King Saul. And he found actually a very large sword here, which is a fascinating detail because, as we're going to see in the book of Samuel, nobody has swords among the Israelites. The Philistines control all the metal production, and only Saul and Jonathan have swords. Is this Giv'ah? Do we have 100% welcome to Giv'ah sign? No, but it's a very likely thing that it is here. What's the building? So the building is a crazy contemporary story. Between 1948 and 1967, this area of Jerusalem was under Jordanian control. And as I mentioned, there's an amazing view from the top of the hill. And King Hussein of Jordan decided in the mid-60s that he was going to have more of a presence in Jerusalem, and he decided he was going to build a palace here on top of the hill. And he began to build it, and then the Six-Day War happened. And the palace didn't end up getting built, but it also didn't end up getting demolished because it's unclear who it belongs to. Is it belonging to the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan? Is it King Hussein's private property? If Israel destroys it, it will cause a whole diplomatic incident. So meanwhile, from year to year, it becomes more and more dilapidated, but it's a fascinating place to go and to see the view from here. So this is where our Giv'ah is in the story of the Pilages Bagiva. Giv'ah is also going to be important for the second piece of the story, which is the battles, right? Because the battles against the Benjaminites center on this town of Giv'ah, and it's the town that's going to be destroyed at the end of the Civil War. Okay, so let's just go on for one moment. Okay, before we get to the Civil War, one more thing, right? If you were paying attention to the story and you know your Tanakh, you have realized the many parallels that are going on with the later story of King Saul. Okay, the most obvious one is the terrible thing that the Levite does. He cuts up his concubine into 12 pieces and sends them out to the tribes of Israel, which is a very inhuman, horrible thing to do. The contrast is when King Saul, as we're going to see in a little bit, hears about the plight of the people of Yavesh Gilad. He's very, very disturbed. He wants to get everybody to go to battle to defend them. He takes in oxen and he cuts them into 12 pieces, a much more normal thing to do, and sends that out to the tribes to rally them. So that's a very obvious parallel. The story taking place in Giv'ah, which eventually becomes King Saul's palace, Givat Shaul, his capital, right? The fact that they gather for battle at Mitzpah, which is also the place where they gather to crown King Saul. Lots and lots of pieces that are parallel. Yavesh Gilad will come to a little bit, but clearly the author is setting up the two stories opposite each other. Okay, the battles, right? What's going on? So the people gather, and I gave you a map here. I'm not sure how helpful it is. I hope it's at least a little bit helpful. Sorry, I really was looking for a better map and I had to stick with Google Maps. Okay, we are in the tribe of Benjamin, right? First of all, here's Tel El-Ful or Giv'ah. Okay, the tribe of Benjamin is a long and a narrow tribe, okay, which essentially goes like this. And the reason I'm saying essentially is because at some point it includes Beit El, at some points it doesn't include Beit El. But for our purposes, this is what it is. The other tribes gather at Mitzpah, Nebi Samuel, which is kind of out here. Okay, they gather at Mitzpah, and then they go to battle against Giv'ah. Okay, and there are three battles. Battle number one and battle number two, the Benjaminites, even though they are incredibly outnumbered, they win. And we know that the Benjaminites, both from this story and from other stories, we know that they are a very united tribe. Part of that is the topography of their land. There's not a lot of big hills and valleys. Everything is kind of small, low slopes, so it's easy to be connected to each other. It's not a particularly large tribal area. They're fierce warriors. And fascinatingly, right, they are called Binyamin, the son of my right hand. And Tanakh emphasizes a few times that they are lefties. They're not righties, they're lefties, right? We hear about this with Ehud ben Gera. All you lefties out there, maybe you're really Benjaminites, I don't know, right? Ehud ben Gera, who's from Binyamin, he's a lefty and he takes his enemies by surprise. We hear about it in a few places. In Divrei Yamim, it talks about them being iter yad yamino. Their right hands don't work. And they are master archers, which we're going to see with Saul and Jonathan as well. Okay, so the first two battles they win, but the third battle, they lose. And why did they lose? Because the other tribes use the very time-honored method of an ambush. Okay, they draw the Benjaminites out from Giv'ah, okay, towards the Israelite forces that are here near Michmas and near Geva. And then when they come out to fight, another group of Israelites comes back into the city and burns it down. Okay, and that's what the story that we have over here. You should have in your sources. The Benjaminites realized they were routed. The Israelites had yielded ground, for they relied on the ambush which they laid against Giv'ah. One ambush quickly deployed against Giv'ah. The other ambush advanced and put the whole town to the sword. A time had been agreed upon by the Israelite men with those in ambush. When a huge column of smoke was sent up from the town, the Israelite men were to turn about in battle. Benjamin had begun by striking dead about 30 Israelite men. They thought they are being routed before us in the previous fighting, right? Everything's going well. But when the column, the pillar of smoke, began to rise from the city, the Benjaminites looked behind them, and there was the whole town going up in smoke to the sky. The men of Benjamin were thrown into panic. They retreated, right? And they're basically completely routed with only 600 survivors. And again, the numbers are very, very, very large here. I would say probably inflated, but the 600 survivors sounds like a normal amount, right? And where do they run to? They run to what's called the Rock of Rimon, Sela Rimon, which we think is the Arab town of Ramun, near the new Jewish town of Rimonim. Okay, they run out to the desert and they stay there. What's going to happen to them? We're going to see in a moment. But meanwhile, there is a terrible, terrible destruction in Benjamin. The town of Giv'ah, of course, is completely destroyed, as well as other areas around. And what's fascinating is to think about, well, what happens next, right? You have all this area of the tribe of Benjamin. There are very few Benjaminites left, even if the tribe is not completely annihilated. Who fills that vacuum? And the suggestion, one of the suggestions is it's filled by people called the Givonim, right? Remember them from the book of Joshua, the guys who pretend to be from far away, but they're not. They're really from close by. They live in the area of Benjamin, and we know that King Saul doesn't like them. And we think that his family is one of the people who resettle the area of Benjamin. But that's a different story, not for us to talk about right now. But meanwhile, the area of Benjamin is decimated. The tribe of Benjamin is decimated. What happens next? Uh-oh, we feel so terrible. What are we going to do? We almost destroyed an entire tribe. And not only that, there are only 600 men left. Okay, you could sort of reconstitute the tribe from those 600 men, except what happens when we all gathered together, say the other tribes, we vowed that none of us would give our daughters as wives to anyone from Benjamin. Again, a vow that couldn't be undone, right? It's sort of like the Yiftach story. Again, there's nobody who's enough of an authority to say you can undo that vow. So what do? Instead, they keep making bad things worse. They say, well, who didn't show up to that meeting that we had where we vowed not to give our daughters as wives to the Benjaminites? It was one little town called Yavesh Gilad on the eastern side of the Jordan. We're going to talk about them later. What are we going to do? Let's massacre all of the people there. These are Israelites as well, remember? Let's massacre all of them except for the non-married women, the women who are virgins, and we'll take those back and they'll marry off the Benjaminites. Again, just piling terrible things on top of terrible things. So they take 400 women, that's all there are. Remember, there's 600 Benjaminites. What do we do with those 200 extra guys who need to have wives? Oh, well, look, there's a feast of the Lord now being held at Shiloh. Okay, we're going to come back to this great verse that we have here where we get really nice, precise directions of how to get to Shiloh, north of Beit El, east of the highway that runs from Beit El to Shechem, south of Livonah. But meanwhile, let's go on with our story. They say to the Benjaminites, you know what? Come to the party, come to the Chag LaHashem, the feast, and lie in wait in the vineyards. And when the girls come out dancing, because that's part of the partying, right? You grab a wife and carry her off to the land of Benjamin. And if their fathers or brothers come to us to complain, we shall say, be generous to them for our sake. We could not provide any of them with a wife on account of the war. You would have incurred guilt if you yourselves had given them wives. So that's what the Benjaminites do. They go into the vineyards, they grab some wives, they run off, they rebuild their towns. Sometimes we talk about this, and this is said to happen on Tu B'Av. We're going to talk about Tu B'Av in a second. And it seems like this sweet, romantic story. I always think of it as sort of like Sadie Hawkins Day, right? Except that the men take the wives instead of the other way around. But it's really a very horrible story, right? You go out, you grab your women, because otherwise there's no way for you to get married. And that's what you have to do. The rabbis look at this and they say this is a place of reconciliation. It may have been a terrible story, but here is where somebody just commented what I said. But here is where you have this chance of putting the tribes back together. But clearly, there's a lot of criticism of what's happening here on the side of the Israelites, the Benjaminites, everybody. Nobody comes out looking good from this story. Okay. However, it does bring us to Shiloh and to some kind of a reconciliation. Let's just go off track for 1 minute and talk about Tu B'Av, right? The Navi does not say that this is what day this happens. They say Chag LaHashem. It's a yearly festival, a feast for God. Could it be that it was on Tu B'Av? That's what the rabbis say, right? The rabbis say that this 15th of Av, in a way, kind of a parallel to the 15th of Shvat, right? If the 15th of Shvat is the beginning of the spring, the 15th of Av is the end of the summer and the beginning of the fall. It's a holiday that we hear about in the Mishnah, and the Gemara goes into lots of different reasons for it, but the Mishnah is probably the most famous quote. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, there are no days of joy in Israel greater than the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. On these days, the daughters of Jerusalem would go out in borrowed white garments in order not to shame anyone who had none. The daughters of Jerusalem come and dance in the vineyards. What would they say? Young man, lift your eyes and see what you choose for yourself. Do not set your eyes on beauty, but set your eyes on family. And the rabbis kind of take this very terrible story of the Benjaminites and transform it into kind of this very sweet matchmaking sort of a story. And in the Gemara and Ta'anit, it goes into various reasons why we celebrate on Tu B'Av. The picture you have here is the chatzav, which is a plant that starts to flower at the end of summer, the beginning of the fall. But many of the reasons that are given for Tu B'Av are all about the tribes coming together, right? Reconciling with each other. So for example, our story here in Shiloh, for example, that when they were forbidden, when we split into the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah, the kingdom of Israel forbade their tribes to go to Jerusalem to the temple, and then they were allowed to again, and that happened on Tu B'Av, right? We also have other stories like the people who were killed in the Bar Kokhba revolt in Beitar were finally buried. This is the day that the people in the desert finally stopped dying, right? We have all kinds of interesting stories, but Tu B'Av seems to have been a very ancient holiday, and perhaps it is this Chag Hashem. Today, by the way, it's celebrated in Israel, very oxymoronically called the Jewish Valentine's Day. It is not the Jewish Valentine's Day, but it does have this connection to marriage and love and matchmaking, etc. Where is Shiloh? So let's now talk a little about Shiloh. We're going to come back to our Pilages Bagiva for a minute, but let's talk a little about Shiloh. Where is Shiloh? Again, it's on our same nice path of the patriarchs, right? Here we are going north. What is more or less Route 60 today? I say more or less because of political reasons, some of it has been moved, but here is Shiloh. And just as the verse describes it to us, right? It's actually a really helpful, it's, the ways of the Tanakh, right? North of Beit El. Sorry, I can't see what I'm reading to you, north of Beit El, east of the highway that runs from Beit El to Shechem, right? Here's our highway, and here it is to the east, and south of Livonah, okay? And south of Livonah, Livonah is right up over here. So it's really a very helpful map. Why do we need to have this description? We'll come back to that in a little bit, but realize that we have a very good description of where Shiloh is, and we're going to see that besides the geographical description, we actually have archaeological proof that Shiloh is where it is supposed to be. But let's come back to our one last thing about our story of Pilages Bagiva, and then we're going to continue back to Shiloh. So we have this strange place, Yavesh Gilad, right? Gilad, we know, is on the other side of the Jordan. This map gives us more or less where we think it is, right? In the area of the half tribe of Menashe, or maybe it's in Gad, but in any case, it's on the other side of the Jordan. It's quite far from Benjamin, right? Here's Benjamin over here. So it's definitely not very close by, but we do seem to have a connection between the Benjaminites and the people of Yavesh Gilad. And it's not only in this story. So we told the terrible part of the story, which is that they're the only ones who don't show up to this meeting, and therefore we're going to take their wives. But the aftermath of that means, as terrible as that is, the aftermath of that means that there is a deep bond between Benjamin and Yavesh Gilad, because remember, 400 Benjaminites are married to girls from Yavesh Gilad. So even though it's a different tribal area, right? It's not Benjamin, there is this intermingling of the families, which one hopes, they become reconciled to each other at some point. And then we have two other stories about Yavesh Gilad. And that's what I'm saying. We have these parallels to the King Saul story. So if you look at the book of Samuel, right, King Saul becomes king, but he doesn't really do much as king yet, right? So here's our second paragraph here. Nachash the Ammonite, right, from Ammon, also on the other side of the Jordan here, marched up and besieged Yavesh Gilad. The men of Yavesh Gilad said to Nachash, make a pact with us and we will serve you. Don't battle with us. We're perfectly happy to be subjugated to you. But Nachash answered them, I will make a pact with you on this condition, that everyone's right eye be gouged out. Not much of a pact. I will make this a humiliation for all of Israel. The elders of Yavesh said to him, give us 7 days that we may send messengers throughout the territory of Israel. If no one comes to our aid, we will surrender to you. Okay, so the people of Yavesh say, well, maybe someone will help us, right? Now remember, this is the first king. Saul is the first king. It's not clear that anyone is going to help them. They don't have experience with one central authority. But the messengers came to Giv'ah of Shaul, Givat Shaul, where his palace is, gave this report in the hearing of the people. All the people broke into weeping. King Saul is outraged. He sends the pieces of oxen. He gathers the people together, and he goes to battle against Yavesh Gilad, against Ammon, more accurately, and he saves the people of Yavesh Gilad. Right? This is a very triumphant, important story. This is when King Saul is still doing well. And the people of Yavesh Gilad do not forget this salvation. And at the very end of the book, the first book of Samuel, what happens? So we're going to talk about this next time. King Saul and his sons are killed on the Gilboa by the Philistines, and the Philistines take their bodies, right, and they hang them on the walls of Beit Shan. It's an ultimate desecration for anybody, and certainly for Israelites who, you're not allowed to keep bodies unburied, and they hang them on the walls of Beit Shan. As a sign, this is what we did to King Saul and to his sons. What happens? Take a look at the last paragraph. The inhabitants of Yavesh Gilad heard about what the Philistines had done to Saul. All their stalwart men set out and marched all night. They removed the bodies of Saul and his son from the wall of Beit Shan and to Yavesh, and took them to Yavesh and burned them there. And they took the bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Yavesh, and they fasted for 7 days. Years earlier, King Saul goes from Giv'ah, crosses the Jordan to save the people of Yavesh. Now, in his hour of need, okay, he's no longer alive, but still, the people of Yavesh cross the Jordan and save King Saul and his sons from their bodies being desecrated. It's only years later, by the way, that King David brings their bones back to be reburied in Benjamin. But the people of Yavesh Gilad have repaid their debt. And it's a very beautiful closing of the circle and this connection of the Benjaminites to the people of Yavesh Gilad. So that's just an interesting set of stories about this place. By the way, one other really fascinating thing, we have another famous person who comes from Gilad. We have Yiftach in the book of Judges, but we also have Elijah. Remember Eliyahu HaTishbi, Eliyahu HaGiladi, right? He comes from Gilad. And there are all kinds of suggestions of where exactly Eliyahu is from. He's very much a mysterious person. We'll talk about him in a few weeks. But there's an opinion, it's actually the Tosfot in the Gemara, who says that Eliyahu is from Yavesh Gilad. He's one of the survivors or the descendants of the survivors of this story, right? Very, very interesting idea. I'm not sure where Tosfot gets it, except that it's Gilad, and he says it's the same place, but it's a very interesting idea. Okay, let's come back to Shiloh. Let's talk about Shiloh now. So first of all, what tribe are we in? So if you look at the tribal map, right, very nice, very easy. You can answer that question so simply all by yourself. You don't need me. Here's Shiloh, deep in the heart of the mountains of Ephraim. Okay. But if you read about the stories in Shiloh, okay, and certainly about what the rabbis say about Shiloh, they talk about it as being in Benjamin. And it's very important to the rabbis that it should be in Benjamin because all the holy places have to be in Benjamin, right? Where the tabernacle is and then where the temple is, they all have to be in Benjamin. Benjamin has certain qualities that the other tribes do not have, among them the fact that Benjamin never sells Joseph, right? He doesn't try to murder his brother, and other reasons as well. So how do we explain Shiloh being in Benjamin? So you could say, well, you have all these Shiloh girls who marry Benjaminites, and maybe they all move there. The rabbis talk about a ritzuah shel Binyamin. There's like a little tongue of Benjamin that comes out of Benjamin and encompasses an area of Ephraim. And I always think of it like in America where you have gerrymandering, right? Where you redraw the districts. Sorry, Canadians, I don't know what it's called there, but you redraw the districts so that you get as many voters as you can. So it's not crazy that you have certain tribal areas that are kind of in other tribes, belong to the other tribes, right? We see this in other places. There are parts of Yisachar that are controlled by Menashe, various other things. So Shiloh is considered to be in Binyamin. And in fact, we have the story of the Ark of the Tabernacle being taken. Who comes to tell the people of Shiloh? A man from Binyamin. Right? He comes to Shiloh to give the news. So that seems to be a good example of this being part of Binyamin. So here's our symbol, one symbol of Binyamin as a wolf. Okay, let's go on. Okay, now remember we said before, Shiloh, the site itself, which by the way, it's one of the few places where the ancient site and the modern site are in the same place. Okay, the ancient tell of Shiloh is down at the bottom of the hill. When Jews returned in the late 70s to build a new community, they built it at the top of the hill. There wasn't an Arab village there. A lot of places where you have an ancient site, the Arabs came, retained the name, built their own village there, and so the Jews built something a couple of kilometers away. For example, very close to Shiloh, Bitin, right? Bitin is the original Beit El. Jews couldn't build in Bitin because it was an Arab town, so they built across the road in Beit El. But Shiloh is actually in the same place as Shiloh. So besides the geographical points that it has, it fits very nicely with that description that we have before. We actually found the welcome to Shiloh sign, right? I always joke about that, but in some cases you really do find it. In 2010, this Greek inscription was discovered. And basically it says, God bless the inhabitants of Selun. Okay, Selun is Greek for Shiloh. It is the welcome to Shiloh sign. Okay, we were pretty sure that we knew where it was, but now we can identify it for sure. And that's really an amazing thing. What happens in Shiloh? So we told our story of the tribes and the reconciliation, but there are other things that happen there as well. The first time we hear about Shiloh, we hear about it in the book of Joshua, where after conquering the land, then Joshua says, let's put the tabernacle, right, our movable Mishkan, we're going to set it up in Shiloh there, and we're going to finish dividing up the land. They had already divided up some of the land, and now we're going to do the rest of it here in Shiloh, right? Why does Joshua choose Shiloh? very interesting question, right? Some people suggest because Joshua is from the tribe of Ephraim, and like we said, it's sort of Ephraim, it's sort of Benjamin. It's also a very central place, right? Take a look at where it's located. Here we are, smack in the middle of the country. It's a good choice for a capital. We don't know yet that Jerusalem is going to become the eternal capital. So Shiloh is a logical choice. And Joshua chooses to set up the tabernacle there, and then they give out the rest of the portions, right? The community of Israel assembled at Shiloh, set up the tent of meeting, right? The Ohel Moed, another name for the Mishkan. The land was under their control, but there remained 7 tribes who had not yet received their portions, right? Most of the last part of the book of Joshua is all about who gets what part of the land. So Joshua said, how long will you be lazy about going and taking possession of the land? And they go, they travel, they write descriptions, they survey the land, go traverse the country, write down description, return to me, and I will cast lots for you here at Shiloh, right? So it's very interesting. I'm not going to go into it now, but it's very interesting that 5 tribes get their portions before they come to Shiloh. 7 tribes get it later and with lots, but everybody gets finally gets their portions, and the Levites get their portions as well. Joshua cast lots for them at Shiloh before the Lord, and he apportioned the land among the Israelites according to their divisions. Okay, so that's a very important event that happens here, but the most important event is putting the Mishkan here, putting the tabernacle here. This is a little bit of a cheesy model, I admit. There are many other nicer ones that you can see if you have the beautiful book, The Mishkan, that was made about 50 years ago. I don't remember the name of the guy, but he made a beautiful model of the Mishkan and took up a ton of photographs. But this is helpful enough for us to understand the basic setup, right? We have the courtyard, with the krashim, right, the pillars and the adanim, the posts that they're put into, and the curtains all around. We have the huge altar in the courtyard, and then we have the sanctuary itself with the kodesh, with the holy, with the kodesh kodashim, with the holy of holies. Basically the same design, only it's going to be much bigger and more ornate as the temple is going to be in Jerusalem. But it's the same idea, right? This is meant to be portable, that is permanent, but it's a very similar structure. It's a very similar setup. And one of the things that's fascinating about making the tabernacle or making the Mishkan is what we're not allowed to do on Shabbat comes from the labors of the tabernacle, right? The Lamitet Melachot HaMishkan, right? That's where it comes from. What is considered creative work that was done to build the tabernacle as well as to do the worship and the service there. So you have all kinds of things connected to making bread because there was bread that was put on the table, the showbread in the Mishkan. You have all kinds of things connected to cloth and weaving because of the curtains of the Mishkan. So that's just kind of a nice little side note. If we think the Mishkan is something from so long ago, the laws of Shabbat are intricately connected with what was done in the Mishkan, and it stands as the standard for creative work, right? You can move your couch back and forth across your living room for hours on Shabbat afternoon. You will not have violated any of the prohibitions of Shabbat. That's not considered work. Work has to be some kind of creating something. So that comes from the Mishkan. Before we get to this, we'll talk about this in a second. Excavations that were done at this site, right? We know that it's Shiloh. Who discovered it? Who rediscovered it? What was excavated there? Already in the early 19th century, the 1830s, the American Christian archaeologist Edward Robinson identifies this as the place of Shiloh. Okay, but then there's not a real excavation until the 1920s. Danish excavation, supervised by the same William Albright, right? The classic biblical archaeologist who digs in Gibeah. Then there's another excavation, Israeli excavation in the 1980s by Professor Yisrael Finkelstein from Bar Ilan. And then in the last 15 years, there have been volunteers and the local authority who have been digging. And they've discovered the Canaanite city, the Israelite city, and we're going to see, we're going to talk about that they've discovered maybe the place of the Mishkan. Okay, but first let's come back to this very important question. We say that the Mishkan is in Shiloh for so many years, but did people go visit it, right? And for that, you have to go back to that that verse that I showed you before, where it says, there's a festival for God, right? Chag Hashem in Shiloh. Shiloh, you have to follow the road that goes from Beit El, right? Gives you all these directions. It's a very strange thing, right? If I were to say to you, when you go to America, you should really go see the Statue of Liberty. It's right outside New York. New York. It's on the East Coast, on the Atlantic seaboard, and you have to take route this and this to get there. Yeah, I know where New York is. Everybody knows where New York is. How do they not know where Shiloh is? So it's very possible that people did not come to Shiloh, that even though it was supposed to be this central place, that people went to other places. And we know that there were local temples, there were local altars. We hear about it in the book of Judges. We hear about it in other places. One of the fascinating things that was discovered literally a few kilometers from Shiloh, there's a mountain called Givat Harel. And on that mountain, they discovered this stone that you can see here, but it's not just a stone, right? It's clearly a stone that has been carved with 4 nice corners. What is this? It's an altar, right? Now it's a stone, so you can't really date it. I don't know if they found pottery near it, but just from the style of carving, from the technology, this seems to date back to our period when the tabernacle is standing. This is a few kilometers away. These people couldn't be bothered to walk down the road to Shiloh. They had their own personal altar. So it seems that Shiloh is somewhat neglected, and perhaps it's because of the corruption that happens in Shiloh from the sons of Pinchas, right? We have a great story at the beginning of the book of Samuel. I'm going to allow myself to go into this a little bit because we're going to talk about different things when we get to the book of Samuel, right? But the very beginning of the book talks about a man from Ramatayim Tzofim, from Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah ben Yerucham, right? Blah, blah, blah. He has 2 wives, Hannah and Penina. There's a rivalry between them. Penina has children, Hannah is childless. But then the next verse is what's important. This man used to go up from his town every year to worship and offer sacrifice to the Lord at Shiloh. Very nice. Really? Is that such a big deal? Isn't everybody doing that? So the rabbis pick up on this verse and they say Elkanah, who's eventually going to be the father of the prophet Samuel, a very, very prominent figure in Tanakh, why is he the one who gets the merit of having this important son? We don't hear so much about him. Well, what's so great about him that he has this great son? So the rabbis say Elkanah sees that nobody's going to Shiloh. And it's very distressing to him because he knows Shiloh is supposed to be the place to worship God. And so what does he do? Every year he gathers up his family, his wives, his children, his goats, everything, and they go and they travel to Shiloh. But rabbis say, what do? Every year they travel on a different route. So that every year they stop in a different town along the way. They make sure to get there, just as it's getting late, they have to sleep in the town. They sleep in the middle of the town. And people say to them, where are you going? Right? They're very curious. He says, I'm going to Shiloh. And they say, Shiloh, wow, I haven't been there in years. And he says, come with us. Right? And year by year, more and more people start to return to Shiloh. But it does seem from our story at the end of Sefer Shoftim, from this story, that Shiloh is to a certain degree neglected. It's not quite as visited as it should have been. So we're going to take a look at the site. Okay? We're going to understand a little of where things are. This is a nice map. Today you can go visit the site. Like I said, it's at the bottom of the hill where the modern city of Shiloh is. And basically, it is, as you can see in the picture, it is a tell, right? It is a mound. Here is the mountain. Okay, and you come in and you walk along the path until you finally get to the entrance to the biblical city. You go up the hill, you go down the hill. Right now, we're going to talk about a few different things along the way: the basilica, the top of the hill, the side, right, the wall, and then another wall. One of the things that Yisrael Finkelstein discovered was the Canaanite wall of the city, and then Israelite storehouses beyond it, meaning the Israelites actually expanded the city, right? And that's on this western part of the site. But the big question that we have about Shiloh, of course, the big riddle is, well, where was the Mishkan, right? Where was it set up? We have this whole site. Only some of it's been excavated, by the way, even though there have been a number of excavations, there's still plenty that has not been excavated. Fragments of homes, cisterns, all different kinds of things have been found. Like we said, city wall, all sorts of interesting things. But the riddle is, where was the Mishkan set up? So we're going to give a few suggestions, but just to see it on the map is easy, right? It makes it easier. Some people say, well, the Acropolis, right? It's got to be at the top of the hill. It's the Tabernacle. It's the most important place. Of course, it's going to be at the top of the hill, right? Others suggest that it's more at the entrance to the city, right? Some people say, well, maybe it's here in this expansion on the side. But we're going to see that the most convincing possibility is actually all the way at the far end of the city, once you've walked through the whole city and come out on the other side. So let's explore those different possibilities, right? And why people suggest them. Okay, so the Acropolis, very nice. Today there's this somewhat bombastic but interesting museum up on the top, which has a movie and has some other stuff that you can see. And you say, oh, that looks really impressive. Very nice, except that nothing was found there that would indicate that this is an area of the tabernacle. So it sounds nice, but it doesn't really work. Add to that the fact that the Temple of Jerusalem is not at the highest point in Jerusalem, right? There is not necessarily a correlation between the highest point and an Israelite temple, even though that's often true with the church of the town, the mosque of the town, right? But not necessarily the temple. So we're going to cross out the Acropolis because nothing was found up there, okay? There's another site that's kind of at the entrance to the entire site. Let's just go back for a second. It's all the way out here. It was a mosque called Jama Asitin. There may have been a synagogue there even earlier, but it's very far away. It's very far away from the Tau, and it doesn't really make so much sense. It doesn't fit so much, right? We suggested that perhaps it's on the side in the Israelite expansion. Again, nothing was really found. So the best suggestion so far, even though it too is not a foolproof suggestion, is at the far end of the city, right? That far northern edge. Just go back for a second, right? All the way out here. Now, why do we think that? We think that for a few different reasons. Number one, in the story, right, in the book of Samuel, the Israelites decide to take the Ark of the Covenant into battle. The high priest Eli is not pleased about this, and he sits and he waits by the tabernacle, by the Mishkan, which is where he hangs out, waiting to hear the news. What's going to be, right? Are they going to win the battle? Is the Ark going to come back safely? And of course, they don't. They lose the battle. The Ark is captured by the Philistines. We'll talk about that a little next time. And the story goes that the messenger, the man from Benjamin, the runner, comes into the town, tells the terrible news, and Eli hears the weeping and the wailing, and he says, what's going on? Meaning Eli is the last one that the messenger gets to, right? So that would seem to indicate that the Mishkan is at the far end, okay? So that's one nice proof. Another one is if you go to the far end, you will see, and I apologize, it's not a great picture. I wish I had a better one, but you will see that there is a nice long wall of bedrock on one side of a little compound, right? Nice long wall of bedrock. And there's a nice long wall of bedrock on the other side. And if you measure the distance between these two walls, right, you get to a distance of 25 meters, or in biblical terms, 50 amot. Okay, 50 amot, if you look back at the book of Shemot, right, the dimensions of the courtyard of the tabernacle, 50 amot, 50 cubits is the width. So that seems to make a lot of sense, especially when we go to the Mishnah. It says, well, why do we need a stone wall, right? This is a temporary structure. When they came to Shiloh, this is the first source here, bamot were forbidden, right? You couldn't have your private altars. The tabernacle there had no roof, but consisted of a base of stones with a ceiling of curtains, right? Avanim milimatan v'yiriot milimalan. Because it's kind of semi-permanent, they had real walls. They had stone walls. So that's another nice proof that we have this site that seems to have walls that are the walls of the courtyard, right? That's number two, right? Location, because of it being at the northern edge of the far edge of the city, the walls. And the other final thing is, again, in the Mishnah, the difference between the tabernacle in Shiloh and the temple in Jerusalem is that in Shiloh, one eats offerings of lesser sanctity, kedoshim kalim in Hebrew, in any place that overlooks Shiloh. And Jerusalem, one eats those consecrated items only within the walls, right? We know there are sacrifices that you're allowed to eat from. Some sacrifices are only on the altar, but some you're allowed to eat from, but you have to eat them in a holy place. In Jerusalem, you have to eat them within the walls of the city. What about in Shiloh? You can only eat them in a place that has a view of the Mishkan. And when they excavated on the hills around Shiloh, they found that anywhere where you had a view of the Mishkan, they found pottery, broken pottery, meaning if you ate from the sacrifices and you didn't finish it, you broke the dish. You weren't allowed to save it. You weren't allowed to take home a little doggy bag, right? So all those three reasons, the location, the stones, and the view, right? The pottery that's in the places where you can see Shiloh, all of these come together to make us think that this is the most likely candidate. However, it's a problem because they are excavating here now. They've been excavating here for a few years. And in a site that a tabernacle would have stood for decades, if not centuries, you would expect to find many, 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 many bones buried underground. They have not been found. It doesn't mean this is an incorrect place. It could be that the bones were brought somewhere else. But meanwhile, that would be a very nice proof that we do not have. Okay, so the conundrum is still somewhat open. Okay, Shiloh is very connected with the story of Hannah. We're not going to read the whole story, but it's a beautiful story. We said Elkanah has the two wives, Penina who has children, Hannah who does not. And she is Marat Nefesh, she is very upset. And she goes and she prays, okay? Now, Hannah's prayer is the first time that we hear about in the Bible that's what we would call private prayer, what we all think of as prayer. We don't have that before Hannah. We have public prayer, right? The people cry out to God together. But here, what does Hannah do, right? Take a look. The second paragraph, she kept on praying before the Lord, and Eli the priest, watched her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard, right? We would classically say, okay, she's praying silently. Eli thought she was drunk, right? He's never seen such a thing before, right? And then she has to show him that she really was praying, and he gives her a blessing. But Hannah is clearly the righteous one in this story. And the rabbis, by the way, learn a lot of the laws of prayer from Hannah. So Hannah is kind of this paradigm of prayer, and Shiloh is the place where private prayer really becomes something that is so important in the Jewish tradition and in Jewish law, and it comes from Shiloh and it comes from Hannah. Shiloh ultimately is destroyed, right, with that terrible battle where the Ark of the Covenant is captured, and the people had to flee, and Hophni and Pinchas, the sons of Eli, are killed. Right? Eli dies, and then we don't hear anything else. But we know that Shiloh is destroyed. We know because we find it in the archaeology. Right? We find evidence of destruction. We find evidence of fire. We also hear about it in the book of Jeremiah, hundreds of years later, where he says, "You think God's never going to destroy the temple? Go to my place in Shiloh. Lechuna beti asher b'Shiloh. Go see what I did to my place in Shiloh. It's not like I can't destroy the temple," says God. I destroyed the tabernacle. I destroyed Shiloh. I can destroy the temple as well. So Shiloh is destroyed. However, it seems to have been rebuilt relatively quickly. We already hear in the time of King Solomon about a prophet named Achiah HaShiloni, right? Achiah from Shiloh. And certainly in Second Temple times, it comes back to become a thriving place, a Jewish village. And we have evidence of that, right? The archaeology, we focus on the First Temple stuff, right? Pre-First Temple, on the biblical stuff, but there's also some exciting stuff from Second Temple. So we have burial caves. That's what you see over here. We have mikvahs, we have ritual baths, we have stone dishes, which are a classic thing from Second Temple times. In more recent excavations, we've discovered that there was a whole layer of a Roman town and then a Byzantine town that's built on top of the biblical town. And we found houses, and we found an olive press, and we even found another altar, another four-horned altar that was used in secondary use. It was used as part of the wall of a building, which is kind of wild, right? So it's a town that continues because it's a good location. It's got water, but not only that, it becomes very important to Christians. And that's true today as well. when Christian tourists will return, they will continue to come back to Shiloh because they look at the verse in the Bible that says, Lo yasur shevet mi Yehuda u'mechokek mi ben raglav ad ki yavo Shiloh velo yikat amim. Right? There will not, the staff of rulership, the scepter, will never depart from Judah until Shiloh. Now, this is a very cryptic, it's a very strange verse. Jewish commentaries say, well, they were in Shiloh, and then after that, we have the Davidic dynasty. But Christian commentators say, no, Shiloh is just another name for Jesus. And the Judahites, right, the tribe of Judah is going to rule until Jesus comes, ad ki yavo Shiloh, until Shiloh comes. And then Jesus is going to take over, right? The new Jews, the Christianity, the replacement theology, they're going to take over from the Jews. And from Byzantine times already, some of the earliest churches are in Shiloh, right? Now, this is an amazing building. This is a basilica building. We'll see some mosaics from it in a second. It's a Byzantine building, right? Meaning it goes back 4th, 5th century. This is where they found that inscription that says the inhabitants of Shiloh. Why does it look so nice? Because when the Danes, remember the Danish archaeologists, when they came to excavate, they needed a place to stay. So they took the ruins of the basilica and they built a modern roof on top, which nobody would ever do today, but that's what they did then. And we found mosaics. This is a very recent discovery because there was a flood and they had to clean it out, and suddenly they found these amazing mosaics, right? So this was a very significant place for Christians, and that's probably part of the reason why it's preserved, why the name is preserved, and we're able to say for sure that this is Shiloh. Few more modern stories and we're almost done. Okay. Shiloh continues to be settled, and in the late Ottoman period, right, during World War I, there's a major battle here between the British and the Ottomans. After taking Jerusalem, the British continue north, and they're in the area of Shiloh. And by Nahal Shiloh, by Wadi Shiloh, there's a battle. It's significant because it is the first battle that the Jewish Legion takes part in, right? The Jewish Legion, that's the guys on the top here, right? This is a Jewish brigade. These are Jews, including Jabotinsky and including Trumpeldor, who come to the British and say, we want to fight with you, right? It gives them legitimacy in the eyes of the British. It helps kick out the Turks, and it also gives the Jews military experience. The Jewish Legion is a very important story, and today there's a memorial to them right outside of Shiloh. In 1978, 1979, the modern community of Shiloh is founded. It's one of the earliest new modern Jewish communities in the Shomron. Today, there are a lot of communities around. It's called Gush Shiloh, right? The Shiloh block. There are quite a few other communities, but the main community is about 320 families. Nearby, there's another much larger community called Eli, right? Eli after Eli the priest, Ma'ale Livona. But Shiloh is the first one, and starts out at the Tel and builds its way up. And probably the most interesting thing in the modern community of Shiloh is the synagogue, is the Beit Knesset, which was built by two architects named Deutsch and Salzmann. Took a very long time to be built. And as you can see, I hope, it's meant to look like the Mishkan. Okay, this is the Mishkan synagogue. It's a fascinating building. It is well worth a visit. It's obviously made out of stone and concrete and metal, but the design of it is meant to evoke the Mishkan. So I'll just point out a few different things here. The pillars outside, of course, are made out of stone, but they are meant to look like the krashim, right? The wooden pillars around the courtyard, and the adanim, the metal sockets on the bottom. Okay, this poured concrete roof is supposed to look like the yuriot, the curtains, right? It's nice and soft and flowing. The staircase going up to the women's section is meant to look like the big altar, the big mizbeach outside of the Mishkan. Okay, so that's the outer part. And once you come inside, once you come inside, the inside is also meant to look like the Mishkan. So you have various motifs, like the incense altar is the reader's desk, like the regular altar is the bima, like the aron is meant to look like the Ark of the Covenant, right? The menorah is just in a picture, but all of these pieces are meant to evoke for you what the furniture of the Mishkan looked like, and it's really kind of neat. And there's also a beautiful stained glass in the front of all the tribes, because again, tribes are obviously a classic design that you have in synagogues, but here in particular, the tribes coming together and their connections, and that's why they wanted to put that here. One of the things that's very interesting about this particular stained glass window, you may be used to seeing representations of the tribes, right? Judah is a lion, Benjamin is a wolf, the Issachar is a donkey. There are no animals, okay? There's one rabbinic opinion, well, a few people hold by it, but there's a rabbinic opinion that you should not have any imagery, even animals, inside a synagogue. Some synagogues do, this one doesn't. So for example, over here, this one on the bottom left is the Benjamin one, right? Instead of choosing a wolf, they chose the cup, right? In the Joseph story, the cup that Benjamin supposedly stole, right? For Judah, instead of a lion, they have the temple, which is, you know, in the heart of Judah. So you have all of these interesting motifs. And Shiloh, of course, is, like we said, we started out with the vineyards, and today there is ample evidence that wine was made in Shiloh. Certainly in Second Temple times, is a very nice wine press, but they are making wine in Shiloh and in the vineyards there again. So that is our look at Shiloh. Let's take a look at some questions. Okay, sorry, let's go back to the beginning. What is the point of everyone wearing white? Because the idea, and the Mishnah goes into this, is that this way everybody is equal, right? That they would actually borrow each other's clothes. So you couldn't tell who was rich, who was poor, right? You're right. How did they know which the families are? That's a good question. I assume everybody just knew everything about everybody. Okay, I have a private question. I'll try to answer that at the end. Joseph and his sons also did not sell Joseph. That's very true. Benjamin is a special tribe, not only because of that reason, right? Rav Yoel ben Nun talks about Benjamin as being a completely internal tribe, meaning all its borders are the other tribes. They don't have any external borders. And as such, paradoxically, the temple can be very universal, meaning it's not, God's reign does not stop at a border, right? It's not we have a phenomenon in ancient times of a border temple, meaning the God of the land protects the land and his power stops at the border of the land. God is a universal God, and therefore he can be internal and control everything. Joshua felt that Shiloh was a good location, or he felt this was the place that God chose. Okay, it depends on how you look at Tanakh, right? Are there human decisions? Are there more divine decisions? It's a good question. You have to look back at the story where he chooses it and see if God has any word on it. I would have to look back. Okay, The Tabernacle by Moshe Levine. Thank you. I knew that there was a book, but I did not remember the name.
It's amazing. It's a
very beautiful book. Some of you may have it like I have it because you got it or your husband got it as a bar mitzvah present. That's why we have it. It's a beautiful book. I don't know if you can still buy it anymore. Isn't Elkanah honored with his son Shmuel on the merits of his wife Hannah? Yes, but we want to talk about him as important too, right? We want to give him a little credit too. Was the Mishkan at the edge of a precipice? No, it's nice and flat down there, right? You go up and then you come down, no precipice. Why didn't they make a rain-proof roof for the Mishkan? Good question. And Shiloh is a very rainy place, but the idea was that this is meant to still be a temporary. It's not meant to be forever, right? It's known that we are till you come to the final resting place. Who destroyed Shiloh? Shiloh is destroyed by the Plishtim, by the Philistines. At least that's the most logical thing based on the layer of destruction. When we know it was destroyed, right? 11th century, it fits with our stories. The main enemy at this point are the Philistines. So it's the logical choice. Let's see, anything else? The Shulchan in the Mishkan has 12 drawers, but under the table instead of on top of it. Right, exactly. It's a great shul. I highly recommend to anyone who could get to Shiloh to go see it. It is really very fascinating. Okay, any other questions, comments? Betsy, you can send me an email and I will answer you. If you don't have my email, here's my email. Okay, anybody else? Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julia, what about animal bones found in Shiloh?
So that's what I'm saying. There weren't, and that's a problem, right? It would be very nice. Now, it does not mean that they could not have taken the bones and buried them somewhere else. And Shiloh is a very large place, and much of which has not been excavated. So it's definitely not the end of the story. But when they have been excavating in the last few years in that site there that I showed you with the stone walls, there have not been any animal bones that have been found. So that's the problematic issue. Okay, Maxine, coming attractions, or we're good?
Yeah, I'll just give a quick summary. So tonight, No One Notice is giving the Shir on the Parsha. Of course, he is going to be doing a focus look at the Mishkan.
Oh yeah, we fit with the Parsha, everybody. I didn't even think about that. How nice was that?
Yeah, I know, that's perfect. And then, of course, tomorrow at 9 a.m., 9 a.m. Eastern, that is, Rabbi Kalman is teaching another shira on the Siddur. And then next week we have a couple of new classes starting. So Dr. Aaron Kohler will be giving a series on Megillat Esther and how it's been read by various people over history. And Dr. Menachem Kellner also is going to be starting a 3-part series on thought of the Rambam and Yehuda Halevi on the difference between Jews and Gentiles. So we're looking forward to, just more great learning this winter season.
Is Shulie continuing?
Yes.
I am. That was only number 4. You're stuck with me for 10.
Wonderful.
Okay, good.
Looking
All right.
forward.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.